Chapter 7. Party Manners. It was the Easter holiday. Barney and Lou were doing some painting in the dining room, and Granny had spread some sheets of newspaper over the table in case they made a mess. Barney had his elbows on the table and was reading the newspaper. "Hey, Lou!" he suddenly cried. "Look what it says here. It says, Bottoms, Mammoth, Circus. Do you think we could go to it?" "I expect it's an old newspaper," said Lou, without looking up from the horse she was drawing. "The circus is probably been and gone a long time ago." "No, but Lou, do come and see," begged Barney. "It might not have." Lou came round the table and looked at the advertisement. "World's greatest travelling show," she read. Golly, Liberty horses, Ranji and his elephants, daring wild animal act. "Yes, but Lou, when is it?" said Barney impatiently. "Wait a minute. Opens at Maidstford, April 17th. That's next week. Come on, Barney, let's ask Granny if we can go." But when they bounced into the drawing room, their grandmother was sitting in a chair talking to a strange lady. This sort of thing was unusual enough in Granny's house. They stood in the doorway, goggling, until their grandmother said, "Come and say how do you do to Mrs. Falcombe Green, children." And they came in and shook hands. "These are my grandchildren, Barney and Lou," explained grandmother to the strange lady. "They're staying with me for part of the holidays." "Oh, but how nice for you," cooed Mrs. Falcombe Green. "And such bonny children too. I do wish I had known about them. I'm giving a fancy dress party for my little niece on Wednesday. Do you think Barney and Lou would like to come? Most children nowadays seem to hate parties, but I think they're good for them. Don't you?" "Ooh, a fancy dress party," exclaimed Lou. "Do let's go, Granny. I'll go as a puma." "And I'll be a caveman," said Barney. "Granny, can we?" "And Granny, can we go to the circus too? It's next Monday. Please, Granny, let's." Now, said Granny. "Circuses and cavemen and pumas, I'm afraid we'll have to see, dears." "They do seem to be keen, the darlings," said Mrs. Falcombe Green. "Do bring them, if you can. I'm sure they'd look charming as a puma and a caveman. My little niece is going to be a Dresden shepherdess. We got the costume specially from London, and she looks so sweet in it. It's been so delightful meeting your charming grandchildren. I do hope we shall be seeing them on Wednesday." Mrs. Falcombe Green swept out and drove off in a large shiny car, and Granny began to explain the difficulties of making fancy dress costumes with only a day and a half to do it in. Perhaps they could go to the circus instead of the party, but she thought their parents were coming at the weekend to take them home. The children went off rather gloomily. They hadn't the heart to go on painting. Lou curled up with an animal storybook, and Barney stood by the window and thought. Then, without a word, Barney slipped out of the house. When he got to the middle of the back lawn, he stopped and thought again, went back into the house, crept upstairs, and searched around his bedroom until he found his precious collection of glass marbles. Then he slipped out the house again and set off for the chalk pit. He was wondering if the plan he had thought of would work, or rather, he hadn't got a plan, he just had a feeling that Stig could help him once more. But it was going to be difficult to explain this time. He was sure that Stig wouldn't understand about fancy dress parties, but Stig had such a lot of things in his den that some of them were bound to come in useful if he could get Stig to part with them. When he got to the den, he found Stig happily peeling an old umbrella somebody had thrown away down the pit. He ripped the cover off and tried it on himself in different ways. By tearing a bigger hole in the middle and climbing into it, he found it made quite a useful sort of skirt. "That's clever, Stig," exclaimed Barney. "It'll keep the rain off too." Stig then turned his attention to the frame of the umbrella. He wrenched the little struts out one by one and then sat looking at them as they lay in a heap in front of him. Barney could tell he was wondering what he could use them for. He found the first use without thinking. It was just right for scratching an itch in the middle of his back. He looked at another one for some time and played with it in his hands. He found that he could stick its 2 legs into the ground so that the long part reached forward at an angle. Suddenly he reached for a small turnip and stuck it on the end that was in the air. The whole thing wobbled a bit, so he fitted another strut so that there were 4 legs to hold up the turnip. Then he brought it near the fire so that the turnip was hanging over the hot embers. And there it was, a standing toasting fork or spit. Stig played with the other pieces of metal, and bent it with his strong hands so that one of the ends snapped off. So then he had a thin piece of metal with a hole in the end. It was not long before he had rubbed the other end to a point on a rough stone, and there was a useful big needle. Stig seemed very pleased with all of the things he could do with his bits of umbrella. He put the other metal parts aside, broke off the handle, which was carved like a Scotty dog, and stuck that into the wall as a decoration, and put the umbrella against the wall with his weapons. It would make a good arrow. Barney had been so fascinated watching Stig inventing uses for the bits of umbrella that he had almost forgotten that he had come for. Then he remembered about his fancy dress party. He put his hand in his pocket and took out a glass marble. "I bought this for you, Stig," he said. Stig looked at the marble with interest, held it up to the light, grinned, and put it in his mouth. "No, no, no, Stig!" cried Barney. "It's not for eating. Spit it out, Stig, please." Stig took the marble out his mouth and looked at Barney questioningly. "It's just for playing with," explained Barney. "Look, here's another." He rolled the second marble along the ground to Stig. Stig seemed amused at the way the little glass ball rolled around, flashing in the light. He rolled his marble at Barney's, and they struck and bounced apart. He played with both of them for a bit, and then handed them back to Barney. "No, they're for you, Stig," said Barney.